You're staying, my friend? Mm-hmm. Good. You'll hear my exposition on what you brought up before. Let's wait for Tim to settle down. This talk is from the 20th chapter of the Dhammapada called the Maggavagga. It's about the Eightfold Path, or the importance of the Eightfold Path, the only path the Buddha taught. And its positioning in the Dhammapada is interesting in that the previous 19 chapters really do lead up to this one point where the Buddha's teaching in those chapters initially a rather broad exposition of what his Dhamma is. And as the chapters progress, he refines his Dhamma ever more. And it also has to be understood that none of those teachings were in a vacuum. In other words, the people he were teaching understood dependent origination, Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path. They understood the proper meditation method. And so he's really describing it, much like the Anapanasati Sutta, the results of Dhamma practice. But in so doing, he's simply describing a different way of looking at Dhamma practice, rather from the grassroots direct experience to this is what it looks like, which is very helpful, isn't it? You know, especially when we don't have any frame of reference. How is this really done? That's really the whole point of the Anapanasati Sutta. And you could say to the entire Dhammapada, most scholars believe, and I tend to think so, but I wouldn't say it's 100%, that the Dhammapada was put together as a book for novices to kind of get them rounded out and where they're going with the Dhamma practice. But remember that those novices were also instructed by, maybe not directly by Siddhartha, by the Buddha, but by other monks and nuns that understood what the Dhamma was.
Is it this year going to publish it sometime? You're going to publish them?
I am. I'm going to, this, the Dhammapada was originally going to be published by now.
Oh, okay.
But impermanence always seems to intervene in my writing and my
working on it.
I'm working on it. I think I hope hopefully by the fall, but I have so many projects working right now. I need an assistant author, ghostwriters.
Need an apprentice.
I need an apprentice.
Someone with a whip.
All right. The Maggavagga. The Buddha's words: of all paths, the Eightfold Path is unsurpassed. Of all truths, the Four Noble Truths are incomparable. The noblest attainment is dispassion. Think about that. This is an awakened human being's declaration. He's telling people that are interested that forget about getting the biggest pile of gold or magical or mystical understandings. The greatest understanding is that which contributes to a depersonalization of our own life, dispassion. The one who knows, meaning the Buddha, is foremost among teachers. There is only one path, the Eightfold Path. And of course, the Buddha is talking about if you are a Dhamma practitioner within the framework of the Buddha's Dhamma. He's saying to those that were listening to him, this is the path. If you're listening to me, you follow this path. He's not saying that there are no other paths. In fact, he's saying just the opposite. He says, as a Dhamma practitioner, we develop the Eightfold Path. There is no other path for the purification of insight. Really, the whole point of the Buddha's Dhamma is insight into our own fabricated views, and we'll get to that, conditioned views, and insight into what constitutes reality. Develop this path and you will abandon ignorance. My commentary, most translations have this last line as develop the path and bewilder Mara. Here's the difference. Develop this path and you will abandon ignorance. The reason why I make that change is just for clarity, for people that will latch on to metaphors and create reality out of them. When the Buddha used the metaphor of Mara, a common metaphor, to simply describe a troubled, distracted, confused mind rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And the constant manifestation of suffering that is represented by different aspects of Mara. I won't get too deep into that. There's an article on the website called Mara in metaphor that gets more into that, the use of metaphor in the Buddhist Dhamma. The Buddha continues, the Eightfold Path is the path leading to the full understanding and cessation of individual, into my words right here, individual contributions to suffering. I have made known the path I discovered for removing the thorn of craving. Again, he's telling us in very simple and basic words, what's the point of this? None of this is unattainable, and it's not even difficult to understand. We know what the thorn of craving is, isn't it? Whether we even understand the Dharma, or the hardly ever use that word, whether we understood the Dhamma or not, we know how troubling craving for anything is, isn't it? It's a constant distraction. We can even have a visceral feeling of that craving. It's uncomfortable. It takes us out of the moment and projects us into the future. And it might even drag us back to the past to recollect where this feeling is coming from. It's painful, isn't it? Even when we achieve the focus of our craving, there's no real satisfaction because we know we need more. The Buddha continues, awakened ones describe the path, but you alone must walk. Those well concentrated who walk this path are released from the bonds of Mara. Again, going back to that reference of release from the bonds of ignorance. Understand this, all conditioned things that arise will pass away. What are conditioned things? Does anybody know? It is kind of a subtle reference, but
thoughts can be conditioned.
Yes, gold star there. In fact, that's really what the Buddha is referencing, is thoughts. Yeah, and feelings, because they're evaluated by thoughts. Now, the understanding of that rests in the idea that these thoughts are rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, leading to fabrications. So a conditioned way of thinking is the result of fabrications, of not seeing things clearly, of making things up and molding our view of reality to fit a view rooted in ignorance of the way things really are. Is that clear?
Yes. Well, also, as you're a child, you are conditioned by your parents to behave a certain way and react a certain way, to feel, to think certain ways. And these are the thoughts that continually come up because they are conditioned, that we have to recognize as they arise, that they are impermanent and they are not based in reality. They are the past that has conditioned you to think this way at this moment.
Yep. Yes, you're exactly right. And there's other influences beside our family and beside our parents, but that is the
society
and the world around us, schools. I mean, it's really an endless list of conditioning, but you're right. It begins in the family, and that points to something important, the responsibility to, don't want to get too deep in it, but how responsible it is. My responsibility for not conditioning my children's thinking beyond just practical safety. Don't run in traffic, but when I start influencing children because of my own biases or fabrications, we can only continue that, but we do that ourselves. And again, the focus is really the fabrications within ourselves that affect the way that we think and condition our thinking rooted in fabrication. So the goal of the Buddhist Dhamma is actually further conditioning to a point, isn't it? But it's conditioning based on the framework of the Eightfold Path to start recognizing and abandoning ignorance and actually deconditioning our minds to be reacting to the world and responding to the world from ignorant views. That's a conditioned thinking and a conditioned view. So when Kandana said in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation, he's talking in a broad sense of all phenomena, because all phenomena is impermanent, but personally and individually, his own conditioned thoughts. And so he's seeing his thoughts as conditioned, and so really meaningless and insubstantial. All conditioned thoughts, all these thoughts that I've had that are conditioned in ignorance are subject to cessation. There's no real substance to them. Let them go and live in reality. That's what the Buddha is saying. Is this helpful? And I get a little bit more deeper into it, because that's where the sutta takes us. Let me just go back and then I'll read it through. Understand this. All conditioned things that arise will pass away. Understanding this, the wise Dhamma practitioner ends clinging to views ignorant of Four Noble Truths and then turns away from disappointment. And isn't that craving is the immediate need for something to be satisfying, the counter to this constant discontent and disappointment that's rooted in ignorance. Buddha continues, this is my path to purification. Understand this, all conditioned things are not self. So again, going back to the description of a fabricated views leading to conditioned thinking, if my fabricated view of myself is rooted in ignorance, is in fact fabricated, what I'm describing to myself and holding out to the world is not based in reality, isn't it? It's based on what I hope I am and what I hope you think I am. Is that clear? It's a clear fabrication, isn't it? And can you see the common peace that comes from letting all that go? From not having to be something I hope I am, or wish I was, or feel I need to be? Pardon me?
Should be.
Or should be. What my parents and the world says I should be? What should I be? As a human being, what should I be? I should be a human being. Why? Why should I be a human being? Why is it paramount for me to be okay with just being a human being?
That's what you are.
And I can try and try and try, but I can never be more than a human being. So why don't I find a way to be content with being a human being? That's the Buddha's Dhamma, a calm and peaceful mind. By understanding what a human being actually is. And a human being does not need to be driven for attainment.
You're a human being, not a human doing.
That's a great way of putting it. And so some people will kind of default to the idea, well, what's going to motivate me to do the things I need to do to survive in the world? Guess what will motivate you? Being a human being. Human beings like to eat, so they'll do things that generate food. They like shelter, so we'll naturally do things that provide shelter. Most of us like to wear clothes, and so we'll do those things that we can generate clothing. And most of us from time to time need medicine. And so we'll do the things and create a structure where that medicine is available to us. That's what the Buddha said a human being needs. 4 things and nothing more. Food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. And think about it. That's all that you need too. And this doesn't mean that if we're in a position that we have more than just the basics, that's fine. But if you define yourself by that, you're no longer a human being. You're a fabrication. Remarkable, the brilliance of this man, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
And that's his Dhamma. That's the Eightfold Path. Understand this, all conditioned things are not self. Understanding this, the wise Dhamma practitioner ends clinging to views ignorant of Four Noble Truths and turns away from disappointment. Again, in just a slightly different way, the Buddha's teaching us why we create disappointment in our lives and how to stop. It's an inside job. This is my path to purification. Understand this, all conditioned things are disappointing. Understanding this, the wise Dhamma practitioner ends clinging to views, ignorant of Four Noble Truths, and turns away from disappointment. All conditioned things, all things that are viewed from a fabricated view have to be disappointing. By not being a human being, by not being I should slow down a little bit. By not being a human being, we think that we could create a whole piece of cake out of one piece. By not being a human being, we think that we can magically create a cave full of coconuts or a house full of gold as the purpose of living. Rather than, the Buddha would teach us, be content with being a human being. And you won't need all those things. He'll say, and I'll say, they're just a distraction. Again, it doesn't mean that if you find yourself fortunate enough to be sitting on a pile of gold, enjoy it. Be generous with it. don't cling to it. And if you find yourself with maybe no gold at all, don't cling to the fact that you don't have a big pile of gold. Be at peace with it. My commentary here. These last three lines refer directly to the three marks of existence: impermanence and not self-characteristic, and the resulting dukkha. I think next week, and finally, but possibly in 2 weeks, we're going to start probably a 12-week series, getting deep into what it means to gain insight into the three marks of existence. And I think it's going to be a remarkable study. And I don't want this to sound too self-aggrandizing, but it's really remarkable. I think it's going to be remarkable the way this comes together and the way we see this perfect insight into three marks of existence. The Buddha states, though young and strong, they waste their lives through laziness and vanity. Such a person remains blind to the path. And I can tell you that the people there's a lot of young people today that are practicing modern mindfulness and even some variants of modern Buddhism. And to a point, I think that's wonderful. But as you see here, there's very few young people that are able to sustain this. And I think the reason why is because the younger we are, the more distracted we are towards establishing ourselves in the world. And it's understandable and maybe rightly so. But when there's an underlying motive to continually establish yourself in the world, that's such a contradiction to what the Buddha is teaching, to just be an unfabricated human being, that therein lies the difficulty. And so other teachings are more supportive of that way of thinking, allowing for subtle and sometimes very subtle forms of I-making, which ultimately doesn't lead to any awakening. I'm just making a point. I think it's understandable that way.
It takes a while in a lifetime to get to that point where you're no longer, you're actually starting to question it.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of, the Buddha didn't start out when he was 6 years old as awakened. He had his first meditation experience at 5. He was 29 years old when he first set out. He wasn't, and I guess in the Buddhist time, you could say that's relatively a little bit older in life than it is today. And he didn't fully awaken until he was 36, so a little bit later in life. And there's other reasons for that, but it's something that I've noticed. And I like to think that when I was 26 is really when I started this kind of search in earnest. I kind of began at 19. There was that conflict. I was, kind of newly sober, so really new in the world, and I was trying to build my business and establish myself in the world, and that really wasn't an overriding and overarching concern. And even though I had remnants of a meditation practice and was looking here and there, that focus was really the primary focus in my life, and understanding of myself really was secondary, and that's understandable, I think. The Buddha continues, a person well concentrated and mindful of thoughts, words, and deeds avoids hurting themselves and others. Purifying themselves through the Eightfold Path, they complete the path taught by this great sage. Wisdom rests on jhana. What wisdom rests in concentration. Without jhana, wisdom fades. I have known, and this just makes sense. If your mind is not well concentrated, even if you might have developed a view that is rooted in wisdom in this moment, without concentration, you'll lose it. You won't be able to hold it in mind. I have known these two paths, one of progress, one of decline. This powerful statement from an awakened human being. He knows the path of disappointment and the path of fulfillment.
Is he drawing a parable to his extremes at that point?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And again, he's teaching some people that already know of his path and his struggles during those 6 years. And he's saying, it's another important reference to a well-focused Dhamma practice. Here's an awakened human being saying, I did all those other things. Excuse me. I tried them all. They don't work. And again, he's saying excuse me. I spent too much time with Bodhi this morning and forgot to have breakfast. He's simply saying, and this occasionally gets me in trouble. I mean, I hear some unpleasant emails, but just once in a while, it's okay. That this is the Dhamma. This is how you practice it. And if you want to develop it, you have to keep your focus on this. Why? Because I know, the Buddha, I tried all these other paths, and this is the one that works. I have known these two paths, one of progress, one of decline. Develop jhana and increase wisdom. And also the placement here of where he's making that statement is in reference to jhana meditation, isn't he? And he's also referencing not just other paths, but other meditation practices that the Buddha tried or Siddhartha tried and rejected them because they didn't lead to developing concentration. The sole purpose of meditation within the framework of the Dhamma. Cut down the forest of craving and the underbrush, but not the tree of truth. What a great visual, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That there's all this underbrush and all this junk growing around. Cut it out, but be mindful of leaving the tree of truth. Don't do it haphazardly. Do it with the framework of the Eightfold Path. The forest of desire brings fear. Clear-cut desire, fear, and delusion. Dispassion is nibbana. Dispassion is the awakened state that the Buddha is describing. Nibbana means literally, it means extinguished. And in reference to the Dhamma, it means you've extinguished the fires of passion. This passion is nibbana. As long as the underbrush of desire is maintained, the most subtle form of this stress, the stress of physical craving, remains. I'll read it again. As long as the underbrush of desire is maintained, the most subtle form of this stress, the stress of physical craving, remains. The reference to is maintained means that we do it ourselves. We like to say and think and feel and not take responsibility for our own stress by blaming the world and the people in the world for it. But in order to have stress in our lives, we must, on a less than conscious level for most of us, maintain stress by maintaining ignorance.
But he or at least in this translation, says specifically the stress of physical craving.
Yeah. Well, and so where does that the craving that is initiated through false thinking is experienced in the body, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I have a hunger, a tanha. We've had the Dhammapada last week. Tanha is thirst. It's a mental feeling first that is felt through the body. And the disappointment is ultimately reflected in the body by there's a physio. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's a physiological process that is a stress response to disappointment and sadness and even elation, by the way. And there's other chemicals involved, but primarily it's a cortisol response, which we know is damaging to the whole physical system, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Just not good for us. What we went through, did that bring some insight into what you were talking about earlier?
This is a great sweet.
It is. It's remarkable.
It takes more than one day to go over this.
Yeah. And this is really a small chapter in this Dhammapada, and it has such powerful and encouraging teaching, isn't it?
You can see now why that would have been used as a teaching aid.
Yeah. And again, you look at I'll get the book out, but you look at all the chapters are on the website, by the way, from 1 to 26. So you can read it now, but you look at the progression, and even in I realize now I probably should have done this in order, but the later teachings that follow this even put even a more finer point on what authentic Dhamma practice looks like when you continue. The Buddha continues. This one's mind is in bondage to ignorant views like a suckling pig. skipping over some of my commentary. The Buddha continues, abandon craving as one would remove an autumn lotus. It's done producing its flowers, rip it up. Remain mindful and cultivate only one path to Nibbana, the one made known to me. And again, as I started developing the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha's actual teachings, after many years of trying to figure out what is this whole thing called Buddhism? There were so many contradictions and so much inherent confusion. And when I finally realized that this is the only path, and how clear the Buddha was in presenting this. I mean, this isn't difficult to understand, is it? How could we get so far from what the Buddha taught, except then giving the understanding of why, what if a mind that is conditioned by fabrications will always try to make things fit its own view, including what Buddhism should be. This started during the Buddha's time and only gained more steam over time. By the first Buddhist council, there were still some people that wanted to change the Buddhist Dhamma, and by the second Buddhist council, the Mahasanghikas were successful in creating an alternative so-called Buddhist practice that is reflected today in the Mahayana Buddhism. The Theravadins did the same thing, taking more of a stance by the third Buddhist council that then separated them from the Buddha's original teachings. Most Theravadins would be very upset with me by saying that. Remain mindful and cultivate only one path to Nibbana, the one made known by me. The fool plans for the seasons while ignoring the danger of a living death. Death carries away the person clinging to worldly entanglements, just as a great flood carries away a sleeping village. No friends or family can save one from death. This is similar to what he's teaching Bahia and many other teachers. None of us know when the end is coming. And if we're going to take to the Eightfold Path and develop it, now's the best time. Because no one knows. No friends or family can save one from death. No Dhamma practice can save one from death. The wise understand and hasten to clear the path to awakening. Clear the path to awakening. I thought that was the end. I had some other notes. That's the end of that. The wise clear the path to awakening. But we can think about that. What blocks our path? What blocks our path? Ultimately, it's ignorance and clinging to views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. One of the ways that this manifests in Dhamma practice is related in the five hindrances, specifically doubt. If we're clinging to fabricated views within Dhamma practice, I'm not talking about someone who's not engaged in Dhamma practice, that will often feel like, clinging to fabricated views within Dhamma practice will often feel like doubt. And a mind clinging to fabrications and clinging to doubt will tend to give more validity to what it's doubting rather than the Dhamma. And may even, at the very least, a mind clinging to that type of doubt and using doubt to inform its Dhamma practice will cloud the teachings, or at least attempt to obscure the teachings to fit the doubt, rather than simply recognizing the doubt is fabricated and let it go. In other words, we'll struggle with doubt. Some people for years and years and years, they might even pick a theme such as not self or impermanence or something else, or maybe compassion or engaged Buddhism or something, and use that as a distraction from actually developing the Dhamma. There's and I'll be careful to not name the practice, but anyone doing it will understand. One major form of modern Buddhism actually uses the phrase over and over again, and I heard it, that doubt is good, to cultivate your doubt. Use your meditation practice to go deep into doubt. Examine doubt. The Buddha said that doubt is a hindrance. Recognize it and let it go. But it's manifested in that way. So you got two sermons today. Mary, let's start with Mary. Mary, how are you this morning? Would you like
Pretty
to?
good.
Glad you could join us.
Enjoying this sutta. It brought me out of the funk that I'm in. And, you know, it just makes it easier for me to let things go, which is what I'm needing to do. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I'm glad it helped. And we all need that to let go. You know? Good morning, Lorna.
Good morning. I think what's come across most this morning is that we each have to make a choice. We have to make a choice of this being more forward in our minds than probably we like it to be, because if it's not forward in our minds, then we can play games with our imagination and anatar and have a real good time imagining ourselves this, that, and the other. So it's really a matter of, being seriously choosing the practice over the alternative of the fabrications, the anatar, and all the, ups and downs that we can produce in our own lives through, getting caught up in life and just thinking we're just that way, and really it's just a fabrication. It's just it really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't build up into anything. It's just moment to moment distraction. But somehow it's difficult to do. When you don't, when you're not concentrated and you're not. It's just difficult to do, to choose. To choose the quiet mind, to understand that there's nothing really else going on apart from we're just here. There's nothing else. Everything else is a fabrication that we've built up. It's just hard to choose.
That last fabrication is hard, isn't it? But like the Buddha said, it is like foam on the ocean. There's really no substance there except the substance that we continually attach to it, that this is real, this is what I need to be happy. And you described beautifully that it takes refined mindfulness founded in resting in concentration in order to integrate the Eightfold Path. And it is at the point of contact. It's right here, right now, as my life is unfolding. It's not something that we can apply in the future when we have meditated long enough or know enough. We apply it right here, right now. And in that way, we're able to recognize things like doubt and fear and all the rest of it as it arises at the point of contact. Recognize this is not me, this is not mine. Thank you. Anthony, good morning. Good to see you.
There's layers and layers of practical applications to living in the sutta, but I guess what I drew from it is what is kind of resonating in my life the most at this point, and that's in the dispassionate, the importance of dispassion and non-doing and just being, where I think most people intuitively think, well, you're going to succeed, you have to be passionate. That was my first thought. Was, wow, dispassion is the opposite of what most people would think. And the importance we put on accomplishments and doing, it really doesn't matter. Like in the law, I always think, like, I go on these conventions sometimes, and I always stay a little bit longer, to the point where all the people that have the booths are taking down the booths, and the people are just some people mulling around. And then I think, wow, 3 hours ago, this place was booming with thousands of people. And they were all like, engaged in these heavy duty professional conversations, and poof, there's just residue and remnants of booths.
That's
I've
it.
been there. I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And when it's
And you realize what a facade it all was.
yeah, it's all and again, it's not it's the way the world works, but it's a room full of people trying to get their way, and understandably, everybody's trying to get ahead in one way or another, trying to keep themselves established in the world, and it's not wrong to do that, and because that's if you're in a certain field, that's how you live in the world. But when you're attached to the outcome, when you've lost your mind over it, you've lost your mind. Stress will be there. You can be a human being or you can be a fabrication. It's in any non-hurtful way of living in the world works for a human being. That's the choice we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rob, good to see you.
Yeah, all that exhortations that we've had to be ambitious. It all gets swept away by this one statement. All dispassion.
Yeah.
Just dispassion that will get you there.
Pretty radical, huh? When you think about it. People would say, well, in a global way, how can we live in the world without ambition? What would have happened to us? We wouldn't have done any of the, people would say, we wouldn't have done any of the great things that we never would have made it to the moon.
Yeah. We wouldn't have created the total
how do you-
disaster that we have now.
Yeah, we may well have gone to the moon without constantly putting out to the world that we might blow ourselves up any moment too. What I'm saying is we can't say it's all good when it's not all good. Ambition, I mean, grasping after power and prestige and wealth and all that. Again, there's nothing wrong with it if the intention and the motivation is pure. Yeah. Einstein is interesting to me. I'm looking at him a little bit, probably because Larry brought him up, our friend Larry. But I've always been interested in physics, and Einstein, I think, was just to formulate the ideas that he did really out of nothing. Experiments is really remarkable, and the conclusions that he came to. I forgot where I don't know why I'm getting into this, but he's someone who said if there's one useful religion, it's Buddhism, but he was also referring to the teachings of the Buddha as preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. He had studied that and understood that. Because it fit with his idea. Now, Einstein died before he could find what we talk about today as the God particle, or the beginning of all this, what formed the basis for this. And so he was looking for a physical explanation of the formation of the world. How did this all come to be? Where the Buddhists, the difference between that thinking and what the Buddha said, which came to be has come to be. As Dhamma practitioners, we don't have to concern ourselves with that because it's right here in front of us. But, and now I know why I was saying this, the point is that you could also become the next Einstein and be a Dhamma practitioner. In fact, I think you would see things even more clearly. It doesn't preclude you from having that type of focus and develop ideas to that extent of an Einstein. You'll simply be more mindful and more concentrated about it. And maybe then you'd see relativity in a relative way too.
Yeah. But this is Sutta in the way that it's just saying this is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it is.
Yeah.
And it just, you throw this into any other dharma, and okay, this is what the man said.
Yeah.
And you're doing that.
Yeah.
Or you're criticizing me for not doing whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, I spent many years in many meditation sessions in different centers and listening to some pretty world famous so-called Buddhist teachers. And I never heard anything about Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. I always heard misapplications of dependent origination. And I never, ever had someone teach me meditation for the sole purpose of deepening jhana. In fact, I don't know that I came across that word until I started studying the Buddhist Dhamma, maybe. But and again, those they're not wrong or anything like that, but it's quite significantly different, and that's the important point. Tim, good to see you.
Good to see everybody. I hope this Dhamma class indulges me for a moment because this sutta, I read it like 20 times. And it's, I know it on the surface, it's very apparent. I get it. But the Buddha has a wonderful way of layering these onions into a nice simple thing, but it's not, because he brings up words of desire. He talks about the desire tree, and I went right to the clinging aggregate, and I looked at desires. And desires is a very broad term because you have your base desires, desire to breathe, desire to eat, the ones that you unconsciously think of. And then we have the simpler desires, right, that are based on the sensual pleasures of the chocolate cake. You hear about the chocolate cake, so you want the chocolate cake, and you smell the chocolate cake, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's relatively, through a good Dhamma practice, relatively simple, I think, to, not worry about.
Yep.
Get it out of your mind. But then come the desires that are base. And the Buddha, I read in the Pali Canon because this sutta intrigued me, where the Buddha gets really intense and talks about the sensual pleasures. And he talked about the young woman. And I think you may know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
And about, okay, well, if a young woman walks by you, it's like you don't even think about it. You have this base desire, and you need to, using the Buddhist teachings, you go through that process of aging and decay and rotting flesh and horrible smells, and then the dust, the bones, and using.
Well, I just got to cut you off right there. That teaching right there about the ultimate disgustedness of a human body as it's decaying is pointed out just for that purpose, but it's not so much that I recall it now when I'm looking at a pretty woman and trying to convince myself that I shouldn't be desirable of her. The understanding of that is part of deconditioning your thinking
right
outside of that moment. So when the moment arises, there's no distraction. I'm sorry.
Right. No. So, and that's what I got out of it. But when I come back to the desires, I look at the harder desires in life, the judgmental ones that we put upon ourselves,
mm-hmm.
that do create, because the desire is wanting, and wanting is suffering. Wanting is good. So any desire ultimately will lead to that, and even like not wanting to die, all those things. And so it's a constant, until the mind gets using the Eightfold Path through the Sutta, which says using that Eightfold Path will allow you to almost manage this, I guess, is how I got it. Manage this until you can get, your mind can get decluttered, your mind can get trained to be able to not get so attached to these base desires and these not so base desires. And so I just found it to be just remarkable in helping me in my present situation with anxieties and with stress and the manifestation of physical pain and the desires that follow that phenomena. So I'm grateful I read it, and like I said, I dove into it, and I need to go back and read it over and over and over again. And then I read some of your book to reinforce a lot of the Pali Canon, and it was just I just think this sutta should be discussed even more. I hope we would, because it's not that simple. There's underlying things in there that he's talking about that are, like you had mentioned, the conditions, the rooting conditions that we have as we grow up that are so hard to let go. I mean, they fight, like I talked about the zombies coming. That's what they are. That's what these conditions do, to me at least. I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I always, in a moment of weakness, those conditioned thoughts want to come back in because it's a safe place.
Yep.
And by using the Eightfold Path and recognizing the noble truths and the aggregates, I can sometimes keep them at bay. Sorry for the long rant.
Yeah. What a wonderful exposition on Dhamma practice. It can seem at times intimidating and overwhelming because of the all-encompassing application of the Dhamma. It works, and it should be applied in every aspect, in every moment of our lives. But the path itself is very simple. Craving originates and clinging perpetuates suffering. And so it is at the point of our contact with an idea or an actual physical object that craving arises in, isn't it? So it's also at the point of contact that we have to, if we're going to, practice the Dhamma. So when it's a powerful desire that we're caught in the grip of, or it's simply, I'd like to have a nice buttered croissant later and it's distracting me. It's okay to have one. It's still the same problem. Mm-hmm. And so no matter how substantial something that is ultimately insubstantial feels, the solution is still as simple and basic as recognizing there's no me here. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not what I am. And that continual reinforcement gets us to the level of useful insight into this not self characteristic and a misunderstanding of self. In the Bhava Sutta, it says, the Bhava Sutta, maybe the Loka Sutta, that where there's desire, there's fear. And fear is simply another word in that sense for where there's desire, there's stress. And the stress is rooted in a subtle and sometimes not so subtle fear, sometimes terror, that I won't get what I want or I won't get what I need. It's still rooted in the need for things to be different than they are or how I think they might be. Worry is that, that level, and that can rise to the level of anxiety when I'm concerned about what the next moment or the next week is going to bring. And if that...
And that's a definite physical stress.
Oh yeah, and it actually kills people. And it certainly is physically debilitating. And where is that thought rooted in? It's rooted in a past conditioned way of thinking. It's rooted in the past. And so as we resolve these issues of being stuck in the path and push towards the future, our minds, and unite our mind with our body, develop a common peaceful mind, it simply passes away. How? By being a human being rather than a fabricated human being. It's one of the most remarkable sections of the Dhammapada, but the whole Dhammapada is like this. In fact, the whole Buddhist teaching. I will teach this again and again. Look at if you haven't already, the Maggavagga Sutta. It's the Buddha's explanation of an exposition of the Eightfold Path. And it's on. If you have trouble finding it, just let me know. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, that really goes down point by point every part of the path. Yep. Every part of the path gets teased apart. And
that's going to be part of this series coming up too. Part of the series is going to incorporate these key suttas and then references to in different suttas about how to develop insight into the three marks of existence.
Briefly, when reading it, I understand, Buddha was very emphatic about explaining that the Eightfold Path, was developed, and he saw it as a middle way. Okay, and I tend to think that this sutta kind of brings that home.
Yeah.
With using the Eightfold Path, because there are certain desires that are extreme, and then there are on both sides, and those are the ones, trying to bring them into the middle. I'm overthinking it. I know I am, but desires flood clutter the mind, at least mine, all the time.
No, I mean, human beings, that's what the
Right.
Dhamma is about.
Right. So, and
Well, yeah, I mean, and you're right. Just to make a point though, the middle way is often bandied about as a pacifist path. In fact, I just heard a very well-known worldwide Buddhist leader talking about conflict. Well, we need a middle way here. And that's an inappropriate application of the Buddhist Dhamma from someone. If anybody else said that, that's okay. They don't understand what they're talking about. And ultimately, the middle way it resolves conflict, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is not some pacifist, meaning, well, the middle way means doing nothing. The middle way is an actual eightfold path that avoids extreme views that would lead to an ascetic Dhamma practice or a practice that was common during the Buddhist time and still common today of complete sensory indulgence as a way of ridding yourself of it's like the years ago they used to think the best way to cure alcoholism was just keep pouring alcohol down an alcoholic's throat. That's that kind of thinking. That complete sensory indulgence will lead you to getting sick of it. Well, most people don't get sick of those things that they are desiring of. They'll do them till they die, or at least to the point of constant distraction. So that's what the Buddha means between the middle way. It's not a pacifist do nothing. It's an actual path that, when engaged in, avoids those extreme views that would otherwise prove distracting. You bring up a very good point. So, wow, what a good class. I can't think of anything else. I think next Saturday we're going to start this series. It might be one more week. I finally finished the basic introduction and I'm working on the outline, which shouldn't take me all that long. There's 3 or 4 new suttas that we'll be incorporating into this, specifically the lesser and the greater discourse on dukkha, what dukkha actually is. But I think we'll be ready to start that in a couple of weeks, if not next week. So, okay, let's finish with metta as we always do. So find your relaxed meditation posture. Gently close your eyes, gently close your mouth, and again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. The Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied. Unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways. Peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Thanks for joining, Mary.
Thank
Peace.
you.
See you soon, I hope.
Thank you, John.
thank you, John.
Thank you all.